Good morning, everybody. You're in for a treat today. And brother Lyle, this one's for you too. If you have not seen the bulletin yet, you'll see on the front page our scripture for today. We're going to start by reading that. I'm in the King James Version. It uses the word charity, which is the same word as love. So bear with that. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 4. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. There are a lot of qualifications that we just read about for love. Have you ever considered what the greatest love story of all time might be? You might think about a book you've read or a movie you've seen, or a personal account that you have either experienced yourself or know of from someone else. There are many love stories in this world, and some of those are very popular compared to others. I did a quick Google search. Google, used with discretion, can be your friend. And I came up with what I found in my search to be the top 4 most popular love stories according to the world. Number 1, guess, Romeo and Juliet. Everyone knows that one. I've read that book once, back in high school. I was required to read it, and I never read it again. You think about the qualities that we just read about in 1 Corinthians 13 here, often dubbed as the love chapter. And it was kind of funny in the beginning, got a little bit serious toward the middle, and by the end, when Juliet fakes her death, Romeo kills himself when he realizes that she's dead, even though she really isn't. And then when she realizes he's killed himself, she kills herself. Tell me where the qualities that we just read are in that. I'm sure, though it's a very popular literary work, I would not qualify it as the scriptures are qualifying love. Pride and Prejudice. I have to admit I like this one. I've got the movie. It is a good show. It is a good story, a good book. And one of the nice things about it is you see Pride and Prejudice. We see individuals overcoming their own flaws. And there's a happy ending. It may not show all of the qualities that we just read about, but I would say I would prefer Pride and Prejudice over Romeo and Juliet if you were to ask my opinion. There's a movie called The Notebook. Some of you may be familiar with that one. And if you manage to watch through it and you get near the end, I have seen it, I'll admit. And then I got toward the end and I realized what was really going on. What? Well, if you're not a normal person, if any normal person, it would probably pull a few heartstrings straight from your heart. But again, compare it to the qualifications we've just seen and read about in 1 Corinthians 13. It may be a good love story, but is it the greatest? And then you have something called Wuthering Heights. I was surprised to see this in the most popular because I hadn't heard of it. But it apparently was a great book. And I'm sure they've made movie renditions out of it as well. I've never read or seen it. However, I did read the plot, and I can tell you that it is a tragic and dark story. And what is wuthering anyway? Wuthering means to make someone feel mortified or humiliated. So it's wuthering heights. So it's the height of mortification and humiliation. I wouldn't put that as the greatest love story of all time. So I gave up on worldly stories and went to the Bible. There are a lot of Bible stories. A lot of them have to do with love. One of the first that came to mind was Abram and Sarai. In fact, if you go to Genesis 12, you'll see that Abram was about 75 years old when God promised that he would become a multitude of nations. That promise was made to Abram when he was 75. And by the time he was 100 years old, 25 years later, Isaac was born to him. Now, some things happened along the way. Remember Hagar, Ishmael? Ishmael was born to Abram when he was about 86, so the promise God had already made to him. And in the custom of that day, Sarai, she was barren the whole way through their marriage. When he married her, she was declared that she was barren from the beginning. They'd been married a long time, and Abram was getting on in years. And so, as the custom was, give a handmaiden over. So maybe not perfect, but there was a lot of patience involved there. There was some long suffering. And then when he was 99, God promised that Sarai would bear a child. So this is where Sarai laughed, as you remember. But yet, when he was 100, within a year, Isaac was born. God kept his promise, despite, at some point, them kind of giving in to doing things their own way. And of course, you have Isaac and Rebekah. You can read about this in Genesis chapter 24. And in verse 67, we do see that Isaac did indeed love Rebekah. And Rebekah was even asked in that chapter if she would take him. Remember, Abram sent a servant to go find a wife. And he brought back Rebekah, and she didn't know Isaac from anybody else. But if you read through those verses, it does seem like they took to each other pretty quickly. And it is true that they did love each other. And then you have what I call the love triangle: Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. Now Jacob, he loved Rachel. And he made an agreement with Laban to marry her after 7 years. So he worked for 7 years. I bet there's a lot of people today who wouldn't bear 7 years of work for somebody else just to get their daughter. They might just decide, I'll do something else. Well, no, he worked that 7 years, and then he was deceived. He was deceived because when it was time for his marriage, he ended up with Leah instead by deceit. But he still loved Rachel, and he made another agreement with Laban to work an additional 7 years in order to secure her. Unfortunately, this generated some issues. The two sisters, they strived against one another for children. And then there was, of course, the strivings between Jacob and his uncle Laban. But it is indeed a love story, though it comes with human flaws. And I'd like, as we think about the use of handmaidens, because indeed Rachel and Leah both made use of their maids to help bear children, and their strivings against one another for that. And if you read in Genesis chapter 1 as well as chapter 9, you'll see that there was an expectation by God that we would multiply the earth, and there was an incredible amount of pressure on women in those days to produce heirs, to continue the lineage, particularly for God's people. It seems so foreign to us to take a handmaiden and say, hey, well, I can't have kids. Well, she will provide a child for us. It does seem a little odd to us, although we do see with some technology today, people are doing exactly that still, just in a different way. But do note that the times back then were different. It is not, their expectation to produce children was much higher. There was a lot more pressure on that. Story I love a lot, Ruth and Boaz. Naomi and Ruth, they both lost their husbands. Naomi was to send the daughters home, but Ruth wouldn't go. She said, your God will be my God, and your people my people. And Boaz saw her dedication and her commitment, and he fell in love with her. It was to me, that is a good love story. That one has a good ending. And if you move forward into the New Testament, think about Mary and Joseph. Now, they were engaged to marry. And this is not the engagement that we are familiar with today. We'll put a ring on somebody's finger, but before the actual marriage ceremony, that ring can come off pretty easily, comparatively speaking. And why do I say this? Because there was something called a ketubah. It was an actual engagement contract. It was nearly equivalent to marriage itself. In fact, the engagement could only be broken by divorce. And so here Joseph finds out that Mary is with child, and he knows it's not his. And yet, when the angel came to him and told him to stay the course, think about the love and faith he had in God and in his own wife to do so. And I can only speculate how, aside from the complications of bearing the Son of God, how much their marriage might have been blessed. And then, to give you an example of something that's not just a man and wife situation, think about Paul and Timothy. Paul calls Timothy my true son in the faith. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, right in the very beginning. He takes on, even though not by blood, but by spirit, he takes on the role of a parent to Timothy. And then this love, you can see this grow a little bit. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul says, you know what I teach and how I live and what my purpose in life is. You know my faith, my patience, my love, my endurance. Paul treats him as a mentor. There's different levels of love going on here. And then if you go to Romans chapter 16 and verse 21, you'll see that Paul calls Timothy his fellow worker. So now, he's not just a son, he's not just his protege, he's also a colleague. He's grown to be equal. And isn't that what we want of our children? To raise them in such a way that they become as good, if not better, than we are? Isn't that what we want for the children? Even better than what we've seen? Here's a great example of growing love. But yet to think about this, to better understand how great the love that we see in the Bible, the love that we see in our passage, it's important to understand the language that it was first written in. The word love, if you look it up, occurs over 1,000 times in the Bible. In fact, I counted 1,118. And there are many more verses that speak about love without actually using the verb. And what I would like to purport to you this morning is that this Bible, the whole thing, is a love story. Well, let's back up to the ancient Greek. In the New Testament, it was written primarily in Koine Greek. That was a language which only lasted a few times, becoming a common language a few centuries before Christ and becoming completely obsolete a few centuries after his death. This makes it it was also a very precise instrument, and that qualifier of being the common language for such a short time makes it very unique as a precise instrument to convey God's will through human thought and in providing revelation about his Son. That ancient language had 4 different words for love. Eros. E-R-O-S, eros. That word is physical intimacy. It is where we get the modern term for the word erotic. Note that the modern usage of that term does not equate to the usage of the ancient language. Note also that eros is not actually found in the New Testament, though it was a part of the language. If you wanted to come up with an equivalent of an application of eros, you might read Proverbs chapter 5, Song of Songs, where God's will for how love should be is explained in a delicate and poetic way. The next word is storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, storge. That denotes family affection, cherishing your kindred, especially of parents and children. Yet this word is only found a few times in the New Testament. One time it speaks a word of encouragement, and the other 2 times it was used by Paul in the negative form for those without affection for others. The next word, which is a common word that you will find throughout the New Testament, is phileo, or philao. P-H-I-L-E-O, philao. This is genuine affection, heartfelt brotherly love. The love that Jesus would have had for John in John chapter 20, verse 2. The love that Jesus had for Lazarus in John chapter 11, verse 3. If you go to Strong's, it identifies philao as tender affection. How often are we showing our tender affection for each other? It can also refer to the Father's love of the Son, if you'll read that in John chapter 5. It also refers to the love of the believer, as you would see in John chapter 16. This kind of love can be a love for many different things. It can be love for good. It could be love for money, love for hospitality, brethren, mankind, and children. It is more common than our previous word, storge, and there are a number of different variations of this word. But it certainly doesn't compare at all to the final word that we see in the New Testament, of which many of you have heard and are familiar with. Agape, the verb being agapao. This word for love is the most common word for love in the New Testament. In the classical Greek, now classical Greek actually came before Koine, so several hundred years BC. This would have been classical Greek, was pre-Koine Greek, and it was one of the least common words used in classical Greek. And it was reserved only for the noblest and highest form of love, which sees something infinitely precious. So for something that in classical Greek was hardly ever used and was reserved for the very most precious description of love, we see that it is by far outweighs all of the other words in number almost to a monopoly. It is so common in the New Testament because this is the love of God. This is the love that Christ has for us. In fact, if you go to the passages we just saw, the whole of our love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, it uses that form, that word, exclusively. And within the passage that we started off reading, just from verses 4 through 8, there are about 16 descriptions that demand our application of this love. And you've got them on the front of your bulletin. Read through it. There are 16 there. Agape is not an impulse from feelings. It is an exercise of deliberate choice. It expresses the deepest, most constant love possible. Let us consider the stark enlightenment of how far we as individuals fall short of measuring up to the divine specification of concern that we should have for others. Read through those verses again sometime on your own. Think about each of those 16 qualifiers. We don't have enough time to go through every one of them, but if you measure yourself up against that short passage and think of how far we fall short of the expectation of concern and love that we should have for others. Maybe to bring it home, let's consider a scenario. And not an extreme scenario. Let's think of something every day. Let's say you're just driving down the highway 60, 65 miles an hour. And you see oncoming traffic. You also see someone coming up behind you, coming up on your tail end. And you're thinking, oh, they're going to pass. But they're not going to pass before this oncoming traffic's by because there's just not enough room. You make those projections in your mind. But yet, this person pulls out into the passing lane. And you think, well, if he's really fast, this person might make it. But no, they don't go really fast. They just sort of ease and idle up beside you. And as you look over, you see someone with bright yellow hair, a dirty tan, pink tie-dye shirt, and you can't see it, but they probably got a ragged pair of cargo pants and cheap flip-flops, wearing their aviator sunglasses. And they're just cruising along like nothing's going on, like they don't even see that car that's coming straight at them. And you're just sure that there will probably be an accident. So by now you've let up off the pedal, and you're starting to pull into the shoulder of the road, and you're kind of rocking because it's trying to pull you this way and that, so you're trying not to get into a wreck as you're going on the side of that road. And that person, he just stays the same speed, almost like he's on cruise control, and narrowly misses that oncoming traffic within half a car length. I'm not going to ask what you would do. What I'm going to ask is, what are you thinking? We don't need to imagine a whole lot. You probably, as he was pulling up and you realized there wasn't enough time, you're thinking, who is this? What are they thinking? What's going on? Are they on drugs? Can they not see? What is wrong with them? And this is so wrong. I ought to call the sheriff and hold this guy accountable. Or maybe you're tempted to drive up right on their tail and give them what for? Because by now your teeth are clenched, the whites of your knuckles are showing, your whole body is rigid, and you're thinking a lot of thoughts. Well, what if you take away that neon hair, that pink tie-dye, and you see someone who's clean-cut, well-dressed? It's not going to change in your mind the fact that they did something wrong. But what if that was myself, Brother Hughie, maybe Brother Lane? I think he's got the glasses. What if that was one of us? One of your brothers or sisters that did that? You would still be having thoughts, I'm sure. And then furthermore, what if there were circumstances that led to that situation? Now, I'm not saying that there was not poor judgment in driving. There certainly was. But what if you knew that person, and you knew that that person had had a terrible day and everything went wrong for them, and their mind must have just been on that, and they really just made a terrible mistake and didn't see that vehicle or think that they wouldn't have enough time? How would that change things? What did God do? Jesus was there in the beginning when the world was made. He was there throughout the ages, throughout the patriarchal times, through the Mosaical period, through kings, through prophets, through the intertestamental period. Then he came to earth himself, in human form, debased himself to our mortal forms. From one of superior spiritual background, and he came, he was rejected, he was despised, he was betrayed, he was treated indifferently, he was tortured. And he did this all knowing that it would be for but a few. Knowing that the majority of the world would never accept him. Yet he went through all of that pain and suffering anyway, with that full knowledge. When we consider the 16 qualifications of agape against our individual characters, against who we are, the level of embarrassment and shame, it can make it difficult to look in the mirror or even to face each other. I'll say it again, the sacred record right here, this documents the greatest love story of all time. To live the greatest love is to testify to this, the greatest love story of all time. To be this virtue of agape love, is to follow Christ and realize completeness in reaching our full potential. I'll give you one more Bible story about love. Hosea and Gomer. If you recall, God instructed Hosea to marry a prostitute. And so he did. And then she betrayed him and went back to her way before marrying him. She went back to a debased lifestyle of selling her body to others and of abandoning her home and husband. And though it may be difficult for us to understand why this guy, he had a home, he had a place that was safe for her, life should theoretically just be better. But there were certainly factors in her life that led her astray. And then in chapter 3, what does God do? Hosea, he was done. Anybody would be done, wouldn't you? I would be. God instructs her to pay to get her back. And it wasn't a small sum either. I did a little research, and it would probably be about a month's worth of wages that he paid to get her back. That's what Christ did for us. That's what God has done for humanity since the beginning. You read Ephesians 2, the first 9 verses, specifically in verses 4 and 8, you'll see that God is rich in mercy and that his gift of grace saves us. Maybe you're having trouble looking in the mirror or facing a particular individual. Maybe you're embarrassed because of something you've done or something that you haven't done. Hebrews 10, verse 10. We have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. It does not matter what you've done or what background you are. We've seen Hosea and Gomer. We see the children of Israel throughout the ages. There is a great love. There is the greatest love story. Maybe you haven't experienced that yet, or maybe you have and you're struggling. May we allow ourselves the opportunity. Christ's arms are open right now. Knowing that of all the bad that has ever happened that we could have ever done, there is nothing that needs separate you from the greatest love that there is. May it sear upon our hearts as an indelible mark upon our very souls, the commitment that has been made to us and the love of God that can live in us. Please, if there is any need, come forward. Come, be a part of the greatest love story of all time as we stand and sing.